You are welcome to this lecture. In this session, we'll continue with Unit 1, the nature, purpose, and scope of auditing. And in this is session 3, we are looking at the types of audits. Types of audits. At the end of this session, you should be able to identify and explain the various types of audits. You should be able to differentiate between complete audit, interim audit, and final audit, and distinguish between private audit and statutory audit. So these are the objectives that must be achieved at the end of this session. Types of audit. So we have private audit and statutory audit. A private audit is one undertaken at the instance of an interested party. For example, we have a sole trader or party, that is partners of a partnership, even though there is no legal obligation that an audit be carried out. So there is no law compelling them to carry out an audit. Now, in the case of a private audit, the scope of the audit may be determined as narrowly or as broadly as the client wishes. So it's at the wish of the client. However, when it comes to a statutory audit, it arises under the Companies Act as a result, which it is a statutory obligation for the accounts of every limited liability company to be audited annually by a professional qualified auditor. So here, the law is compelling you. The Companies Act is compelling the limited liability company to audit its financial statement annually by a qualified professional. Now, statutory audits have their scope largely determined by the governing legislation, which the client or the auditor has no authority to vary in any way. So the scope are there, the guidelines are there that must be followed. Now, despite the fact that the appointment of an auditor is the statutory requirement, the relationship between the company and the auditor is governed by contract. So the auditors are appointed, but the relationship between that company and the auditor is governed by what? A contract. Now let's look at external and internal audit. External audit is where independent persons are brought in from outside an organization to review the accounts prepared by management. So this independent person is not an employee of the organization. It's an independent person altogether. After management has finished preparing financial statement, and then the independent person comes to assess and express opinion. Now, internal audit. Internal audit is where an organization appoints a full-time staff to monitor and report the running of the company's operations. So we call them the internal auditors. They are part of the organization. They are employee in the organization. So the organization appoints them to monitor and report on the running of the company's operation as time goes on continuous basis, because they are part of the organization. But the external auditor comes in within certain period, and after performing his duty, he is out. Now let's look at complete audit. When we say complete audit, what does it mean? Complete audit applies to smaller concerns where the volume of transactions and complexity of record do not require the auditor's attendance more than once each year. Now, because of the volume of the transaction and how complex it is, we are saying that it is not, or it does not require the auditor's attendance or his presence more than once a year. Now, these are smaller concerns. Now, this visit normally takes place as soon as the business financial year ends and continues until it has been completed and the audit report is signed. So you only come in when the financial year has ended and the reports are ready. You keep working on the report until you are done and you sign the audit report. Then you are done. You come in the next period again when the report is ready. Now, interim audit. Now, in the case of larger client, the auditor will often find it necessary to proceed with the audit on an interim basis in view of the volume of testing to be undertaken in order to reach an opinion on the reliability of the record. Now, interim audit may be biannual, quarterly, or even monthly, depending on the volume of audit work considered necessary. So here the auditor visits the client more than once in a year and keep testing and then performing the audit alongside due to the volume of transactions that must be tested, that must be processed, and that must be worked on. Because if the auditor decides to wait till the end of the year, the volume of transactions and some certificated transactions will not give it enough time for you to do a correct and independent work. So it has to be doing the interim audit, either annually, semi-annually, or quarterly. Now, where the system of internal control operated by a large company displays fundamental and material weaknesses, the auditor may be obliged to check a higher proportion of transactions than would otherwise be necessary, and in exceptional circumstances, members of the audit team may be required to execute checking work continuously throughout the period to which the accounts relate. So what this basically means that if the internal controls in the client are not strong and then there are some fundamental material weakness, then the auditor has to do a lot of testing. It has to put in maximum effort and then go deeper to continuously check and execute its workings from the period in which those transactions relate. But in a situation where the internal controls are working effectively and there is no material weakness and co, the work to be done by the auditor would be less as compared to where there is internal control and then the fundamental material weaknesses are very, very high or weak. So basically, these are the types of audit we have. We have the private and the statutory one. We have the internal audit. We have the external audit. We have the complete audit. We have the interim audit, and then we have what we call the continuous audit. So basically, that is what we have as the type. Try as much as possible to know the difference between these types of audit, how you distinguish between them. So in summary, we've been able to look at the various type of audit. In the subsequent lectures or sessions, we'll be looking at the other aspect covering the scope and the purpose of the audit. Thank you very much and see you in the next session.